My friends, what is going on? Welcome, 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 welcome. I apologize for being a little late. We're having some technical difficulties over here. And so thank you so much for your patience. And hopefully it can work out. So we will see. We're going to see. So I'm sorry that we are starting a little bit late here, but I appreciate your patience as some of you are filing in. Where are you in from, friends? Where are you in from? Can you hear me okay? Got a new webcam. Does it look okay? Am I moving? What's going on? It's supposed to be high def. Does it look high def? How many pixels am I right now, huh? Oh. No? All right. My friends, we're in an interesting place because thank you, Scott Hendricks. Appreciate you, brother. You know what I'm saying? Out here, I'm repping the National League tonight. So, I love it, my friends. So, let us get this show started. As always, let me know where you are calling in from. We'd love to hear from you as well. My boy Brian Johnson is going to be on it here in just a minute. We're going to bring him out. Brian, if you can hear me, you should make sure that we're live on your Facebook page also. But I don't know if that's don't worry about it, actually, brother. We'll just stick with what we got right here. You can share it later. My friends, let's get this show started. Welcome to this episode of Diner Talks with James. I'm James. I'm super excited to be here with you. My friends, we have an amazing show tonight. Brian Johnson, Dr. Brian Johnson to you, is on the show. He is an exceptional man, just a ball of life, and I like the way he thinks. And so I'm really excited to have him on the show today. But before we get to that, you already know what we got to do. Tonight's Top three. Let's go. All right. My boy Scott Hendricks, longtime listener, asked me, James, what are your three favorite songs from Hamilton? My friends, if you don't have Disney Plus, get your friends log in and watch Hamilton. It is an incredible piece of art. It certainly has some gaps in history that it probably should have included, but as a work of art and as a play, it is incredible. My top three songs are, first off, when the Schuyler sisters show up, right? Because, my friends, I'm a New Yorker, and history is happening in Manhattan, and we just happen to be in the greatest city in the world. Shout out to the Schuyler sisters and Peggy. All right. Next, one of my favorite songs to sing is Wait For It. I think the character of Aaron Burr is so complex to play, and I think Leslie Odom Jr. nails it. There's a reason he won the Oscar and Lin-Manuel Miranda did not. It's just an incredibly hard character to play, and he kills it. And that song, Wait For It, I just love it. It's also in my range, so I sing it a lot. And last but not least, when our boy George Washington told Alexander Hamilton that he wanted to resign, One Last Time is the name of the song, and that song is super powerful to me. I love it. It is beautiful. It's a lot about this country. It also makes me think about when the cast of Hamilton sang that to Barack Obama on some of his last days, and shout out to 44. So I love that song. It also makes me think of my uncles, and I love it. Hamilton's incredible. Whenever I think about it, I think about my nieces singing the Schuyler sisters songs and Helpless and stuff like that, and it's a beautiful piece of art. That's first on top three. Next, top three muscle cars in the 60s. Here's why we're doing this. We lost a great man yesterday, my friends. Unfortunately, my Uncle Tim, my mom's oldest brother, passed away yesterday. And it is unfortunate because it's sad to lose a life, but it is fortunate because he lived a hell of a life. He's an incredible man, and just one of the kindest souls, one of the best listeners I know, and he's been through so much in his life and with his family that the man deserves all the damn peace he now has. And fortunately, he is in a great place right now, and I'm excited to fly home to New York and celebrate his life. But he was a huge muscle car lover. I remember going over his house. We'd always talk about muscle cars while we played in his basketball in his front yard, and we go play with his husky in the backyard. And I love my Uncle Tim for sure. So these are the top three muscle cars from the 60s. First off, 1967 Mustang Fastback. That line, that fastback sex. Oh God, it's so beautiful, friends. Next, 1967 Pontiac Gto. Uncle Tim had one of those because he was a boss like that. And my favorite car that my Uncle Tim owned is probably also why it's also one of my favorite muscle cars of all time. 1968 Chevy Camaro SS powder blue with the white blue racing straps running from the tip to the tail. Stunning V8, my friends. Last but not least, top three. Here is how I celebrated Independence Day this week. These are the top 3 ways that I celebrated our country's independence from British rule. Number 3, I ate a whole bunch of s'mores. Some may say too many s'mores. And I also shot a crossbow because my mother-in-law shoots crossbows. So you better believe I asked for her permission before I asked for her daughter's hand in marriage. But next thing that I did, number 2 thing that I did on Independence Day to celebrate the independence from our country is I posted a whole bunch of posts around Black Lives Matters, my friend, because not everybody is quite free in this country just yet, which is why the number 1 thing that I did to celebrate our country's independence on July 4th was wore a shirt from Canada. All right, my friends, thank you so much for coming through. That was tonight's top three. Coming up to the stage right now, my boy, Dr. Brian Johnson. He is a fellow speaker, but he is so much more than that. He is an author. He has written a plethora of books. His latest book, Send Judah First, came out pretty recently, and I'm excited for him to talk to you about it. He's a powerful diversity and equity and inclusion speaker, and he's just a great man, an incredible father, and he's also got this fascinating blended family that I'm excited for him to tell you all about. Can you do me a favor? Can you clap it out right now for the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Brian Johnson? What up, boy?
What's up? What's going on, babe?
How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm great. It's good to have you on here, man. Good to have you on. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Can you
yeah,
hear me
for
okay?
sure. Now you live in. I can hear you okay. I can. The only thing that's better than the way you sound is the way you look. So that's just facts. Brian, you currently live in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania.
Yep. Yep.
How are things going? How are things going over there?
Everywhere.
You're an hour from everywhere.
Yep. So, aside from being quarantined still half the time, it's fine.
Okay, good. I'm glad. Now, Brian, have you visited? You've been to a diner before, yes, or a Waffle House or anything like that? Yeah, go ahead.
I love me a greasy spoon.
Yeah, for sure. Great stories and even better food. Definitely. What is your diner order, Brian? What do you normally get at a diner?
I gotta have French fries. That's all I know.
Now, do you do your French fries naked, or do you do like gravy on top, Jersey style, or do you do cheese?
Ketchup.
Do you do just ketchup?
Ketchup, vineger.
Ketchup and vinegar. Okay, vinegar. That's a little Delaware. Delaware taught me about the vinegar thing.
I didn't know it had a location.
I don't even know. I don't know if it did either. That's just where I learned it. That's where Delaware was first in my book. It's first for other people in other books, but that's where it's first in my book. Well, I'm excited to have you on here, brother. Thank you so much for joining us, Brian. I'm pumped to talk to you. You have a large family, Brian. Tell us how big is your family?
My personal family?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. How many do you have living in the house or around the house?
I have a total of 4 children.
Okay.
2 of them are living at home right now.
2 of them are living at home. The others are not. Okay.
The other 2 are adults and on their own.
Okay. How does that feel to have them out of the house? Is that good or bad?
The problem, the thing that happens is the problem with children is when they grow up, they go away. That's it sounds good, but it's not, especially when you have grandchildren.
Sure.
I have 8 grandchildren that I never get to see. And so that's the hardest part about them going on their own. So I have 2 children living at home, and my son, he is 24, and he just 2 weeks ago got engaged. So he's making arrangements now to leave me and move out on his own. his fiance is here all the time. So
Okay.
she's just another one of my children.
Okay.
We like it's
her.
never a problem for her to be here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Love her. She's very much like we are.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Now, here's a fun fact about your family: is that you have, I don't know if blended is the right term. I don't know if that's the right term, but feel free to tell me what you would call, if there's a term for it. But some of your children are adopted, correct?
The two that are growing up and on their own, they were adopted.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That is beautiful. Well, adoption is not for the faint of heart. It is an absolutely incredible process. It's also a butt ton of work,
especially when you do it the way we did. Because our kids were
tell me about
teenagers. They were teenagers when they came into our lives. So our oldest, who's 36 now, was 13 when we got her. And then the next one was 15 when we got him. So most people adopt when they're babies. It's really easier to raise an adopted baby. When you get an adopted teen, it's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah, so, I would imagine. What inspired you to adopt teenagers?
Love.
There you go.
So what happened was, both my wife and I worked for different social service agencies, and my wife was a kind of a group home leader.
Okay.
And our oldest girl, was one of her girls, one of the girls in her care, and so we found her, and through our relationship in the group home, she fell in love with us, and I fell in love with her, and so we went from there. So they were not stranger adoptions. We knew their families, they knew us. So it was both easier in terms of the process, but it was harder in terms of, I had to have the real deal conversation with both of my kids. I said, listen, I know I'm not your dad, but I'm your dad. And so when you get mad at me, and you will, I don't want to hear you throw it up in my face that I'm not your father. Because there is no difference between you or one of my other children. You are my child.
Yeah. And
so I never once heard that again. Because I treated both of them as if they were mine, because they were mine. Mm-hmm. And they accepted me that way. So it would make it a lot easier.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It would have been nice. It would have been nice. Not going to lie. For them, if we had a chance to raise them from when they were wee little, but we didn't have that.
Yeah.
And so they were already sort of steady with their own way of life. They had their own sense of who they were. Yeah. While I didn't necessarily agree with all those pieces, I had to help them understand who we were and who they were through us.
Yeah.
So there were challenges, but yeah, I love my kids.
Yeah, for sure. I know you do, Brian. And that's why I love talking to you about your kids as well, just watching you glow a little bit. Now, I'm curious, kind of going along the line of what you were just talking about, what a big thing that families need to have are values. Obviously, our core family values. How was that process of basically, because in a way you had a new hire, and you had to get the new hire to care about the company's values, right? In a very different way, but what was that process? What was that process like for you? In just how did you and your partner talk about that? As far as okay, here's what we're going to try to do. How did you try to instill those values? Were those, was it a slow drip, or how did you do that? And what were some of those values?
It definitely was a process. Mm-hmm. And both of the kids are very different. I don't necessarily want to put all the business out on the street, but my oldest had her own way of seeing the world.
Okay.
And so part of the challenge for her was seeing that she was better than what she had been used to. And so there was a lot more of us helping her to see what we saw in her. And so she had her challenges, but she's on the right track now. And so, and then with my son,
Dropping stuff over here. Don't mind me.
he had been in the system for quite some time, and he had been bounced around from home to home. Yeah. Yep. And he had been in multiple homes for a number of years. And when we came across him, he was also one of the children. My wife and I were running a group home together at a boarding school in Hershey, and that's where we met him. And I fell in love with him, and we had a long conversation. One of the things that we have learned over the years is that kids understand love. Yeah. They understand who's for them and who's not. And so I think they challenged, and they wanted to get over on the system, as kids from the system do.
Yeah.
But when they see that you love them, they're much more willing to go along with the program if they can trust you. And so that was a big part of the process for them, getting them to trust me and to recognize who I was, and that I was not, as is commonly said, there's a meme going around Facebook that talks about what do Black parents often say: "I'm not one of your little friends." So once they recognized that I was not one of their little friends, that I was their dad,
yeah,
they had to come. There were times when we had what are called come to Jesus meetings, where they had to come to an understanding of who what the game plan was.
Yeah,
and so they each have made some decisions, but they're getting it together now. They had to go through their ups and downs and their trials and tribulations, but they're doing well now.
That's good. That is really great to hear. That process of trust building is fascinating. We do it with every friendship we have. We do it with every coworker situation we have. We do it with our relationships and whatnot. And building trust is truly a mixture of time, patience, and
absolutely.
Yeah. And fatherhood is something that I don't know. Fatherhood is something that I would imagine spikes insecurities, right? Like, it's like, am I going to be good at this? I have no idea. I don't want to be a terrible dad. I don't want to be am I a good enough person to even be a good enough dad, and all those kind of things. And so, but in the face of our insecurities, we often are less patient. Yeah. Right? Like, that's where we know this in conversations that we have, the defensiveness comes out and stuff like that. Yeah. How was that for you in that process of building trust, and just like for you also having to TTP trust the process?
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge for me was trying to find that patience. Because the reality is most parents have no clue what they're doing. if they're honest.
Yeah.
And I'll be real. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I did, because our first biological child was born the same year where we adopted our first daughter, and so I was kind of making it up as I went along.
Sure.
And so there were a lot of things that I did with all of my children, all four of them, that I wish I would have done differently. But we try to prove ourselves as parents to make sure that we're doing it right. And make decisions that we probably wouldn't. And there's a lot of things that I wish I could have done differently with all of my kids, because each child is different, has their own world sense of the world and worldview, and their understanding of how they are going to participate in the world. So you want to give them that space to grow up, but also stay within the confines of your rules and with what your expectations are. So. And then all of my kids, all four of them are older than what they appear.
Yeah.
So, and mentally. And so helping them to try to see a better existence for themselves was super important to me.
Yeah.
So, helping them to see that the world is the way it is, but they have a way above that and around that.
Yeah.
That they are more than what they have thought they were. So helping them to see those things.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You know, Brian, I don't, I'd be curious to hear this question. If this is too deep, you let me know, but, or too personal or whatnot, but, you know, you are a black man. I don't know if you knew that about yourself. But no, and I'd be curious, you know, in the adoption process, adoption is interesting because you can kind of like pick what kind of kid you want, right? Like, and so it's very interesting. It's just a very interesting idea for a family, right? I have relatives of mine that are like, they were unable to conceive, and they're like, okay, well, you know, if we're going to try to figure out another way to do this, like, what kind of a child do we want to have? And it's fascinating, and science has also more than caught up as well. But in the adoption process, I'd be curious, you know, what kind of conversations did you all have in that process? Did you, and I do not know the backgrounds of any of or the way any of your kids identify. But so I'd be curious, was that a conversation that you all had, or was it more of like you said, you met your daughter and like it just clicked and you're like, let's rock? Or tell me a little bit about that.
For us, it was really all about, I don't think either my wife nor I had planned to adopt.
Okay.
We somehow just knew that those kids were ours.
Yeah.
And both of our adopted kids are white.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm black, as you noted. I know they like to pretend and say we're colorblind, but you can't help but notice this brown flesh. So I identify as black. My wife is Latina. Mm-hmm. And so we had 2 children by birth. And so they're mixed, if you will. And so both of them are black Latino. Mm-hmm. And my son, my birth son, he readily took to his Spanish side. He speaks Spanish. As a matter of fact, now he teaches Spanish in high school.
Yeah.
And then my daughter, my younger daughter, she did not really own her Spanish side. She does now, but growing up, if you were to ask her how she identified, she would tell you she was brown. Mm. And then at the same time, we have these 2 white kids. And it was interesting when our kids were younger, especially our oldest boy, Thomas has never, ever in his life, as far as I know, dated a white girl.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, one time he told me, Dad, you know, the blacker the berry. I said, boy, if you finish it, I'm going to punch you in your mouth. I said, because here's some realities for you. Mm-hmm. You have to understand, I appreciate that you can identify with your black dad as much as you do. But the reality is, when you walk outside the 4 walls of this house, you are a white man all day long. Yeah. No matter how much you love me and how much I love you. Mm. And you get white male privileges that your black daddy doesn't. And so we had real talks around those kind of issues. And so I don't think that my wife or I actually planned and just say, hey, let's go adopt some kids. We did think about that after the fact. We did. We did
you had them for a couple of years.
Yeah, we did plan. We thought about adopting more kids. Always the plan to do teenagers. But our biological children, as they were growing up, they asked us not to adopt more until they were growing on their own. They didn't want to share us anymore.
Oh, okay.
Which I totally get.
Sure.
So, plus I would say,
as the baby of the family, you know, I understand that as well.
I'm the baby of my family too.
There you go. I love that, man. Thank you for telling us about that. I really appreciate it. It is so fascinating to me that you have a choice, and how do you make the choice that you make? And so I love that you told us that story, man. I really appreciate you. Let us into your family a little bit. That means a lot. It's also interesting as you started to allude a little bit, as you mentioned, to white privilege of your son. When you walk out this house, you are a white man who has the white privileges. Diversity, equity, inclusion, justice are all passion areas of yours, Brian. And they're things that you have done for a number of years. You worked at the Frederick Douglass Center at Bloomsburg and did some really, really amazing work in that space. What drew you to become passionate about that work?
For some reason, I've always been interested in topics like these. I'm a child of the civil rights movement, born at the end of the '60s into the early '70s, and so I cut my eye teeth on understanding issues of power and dominance. So I've always been interested in this kind of stuff. I'm very quick to acknowledge the ordinary folks who were involved in the civil rights movement. Everybody remembers Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, but do you know Jimmy Jackson? These are people whose names don't necessarily ring a bell for us in the national public, but are very important to the fight. Viola Liuzzo, white woman who was 39 years old, I think she was, when she was killed by the Klan, because she was driving protesters around in her car. So she had driven from Detroit to Selma, Alabama, to do her part, to play her role. And it's a shame to me that we don't honor her in the same way that we do other people, because we don't recognize her name. And so, and that I will tell you is what the problem with the way we do social justice action in this world, because we are too celebrity driven. Everybody's waiting for the next Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King is dead and gone. And I mean him no disrespect. Everybody's waiting for the next Barack Obama. Barack Obama has done his job. He's 44 and he's done his work. Let that man retire. There are still others who need to do the work. And so I can't afford to wait for the next person. I have my part to play. I have my role in this whole game. And so there's an organization around my town. It's called If Not Us, Then Who. So I'll add if not now, then when. Because there's so much work to be done. In this day and age in which we're living, I may not be able to lead the march, but we can all do something. And so if in my little piece of the world, my goal is to help others to see the larger patterns of inequality that happen in our world. And so I could tell you, I think I just had a thought about when my attention to these things got really interesting. I remember being a senior in high school. And a good friend of mine was running for homecoming queen. And to my knowledge, at the time, there had never been a black homecoming queen at my school. And so I remember stuffing the ballot box. Now, the reality is I got caught, I got suspended, and she still didn't win. But I remember being very bothered by the fact that there had not been anybody black to represent the school in this way, not that anything was fair. And so I was going to do my part to even the playing field a little bit. It didn't work, but that was my real commitment in action.
That was it. That was it. Yeah. I love that. And that's that's a powerful story of like, when's the first time that you recognized that, hang on a second, there's not a lot of representation of people who look like me out here, right? Like that's a powerful moment. I mean, it has to be.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was writing the other day. I am writing a book now about an unknown slave
Mm.
who his name was Caesar. He lived in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and he was enslaved in Alabama. He was a preacher um, who preached to integrated congregations in Alabama in the early 1700s. I mean, the late
Really?
early 1800s. Yeah. So I'm absolutely amazed because I was talking recently about the movie series Roots and how impactful that was to me as a young boy. Um, when that show first came, I remember the day it came on. It came on in January of 1977, I think it was. And I had been used to not seeing folks who looked like me on the TV screen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember when that movie came out, it was a miniseries, a televised miniseries. And I remember running down the street yelling, Roots is on, Roots is on. You know, back then there were only like 3 channels.
Yeah.
And so everybody, you know, I was yelling, Roots is on, Roots is so we got to experience this TV screen full of black folks. Yes, that was telling stories of slavery, and yes, every single day that movie was on. I think it was like 6 nights. Every single day when I was in elementary school,
Yeah.
I got into a fist fight, because somebody called me Kunta Kinte, or they called me Toby, related to the character in that movie.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I remember getting into a fight every single day that show was on. So I'm still interested in the slave stories. I can't quite tell it as Alex Haley did, but I'm interested in the stories of those who don't get recognized. That's how my book San Judah First came to be.
Mm.
I happened to, while I was at Bloomsburg, I took a field trip with some students to Belle Grove Plantation in Northern Virginia. And we spent the night in a former plantation. And while we were there, there was a National Park Service ranger giving a presentation where she was interpreting the history of a woman named Judah, who was the
Hang on one second, brother. You're breaking up just a little bit.
of the
Fun fact, Brian Johnson's also part robot. I left that out of the introduction. Brian,
and
your internet froze up on us just
she
a little bit, and your book sounds
told
awesome, so I don't want to cut you off.
us the story of Judah.
Okay, Brian, I'm not sure where we got you. Okay, there we go. There we go. Rick Daniels in the building. What's up, Rick? Good to see you. I love it. Hey, thank you so much. Brian,
Go.
what's up? You're back. There you go. Now you're looking good. You're looking good now. Rick Daniels says hello, Brian.
Hey, buddy. Love you too, man.
So please go back to telling us a little bit more about Judah, if you can, and tell us a little bit more about the book, Brian. It matters. I want to make sure we don't miss that.
The park ranger, her name was Shannon. So Shannon was telling us the story about the woman who was the cook in that plantation for over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I remember Shannon saying at the end of her presentation, she said, I want you to consider what life was like for Judah. Judah was, best we can tell, barely a teenager, barely out of her teens when she came to that plantation. She came with 2 children, and by the time she died 20 years later, she had a total of 12 children. in slavery. And it kind of struck me that no one would ever know this woman. One of my greatest fears, as I was telling you, is feeling insignificant. So imagine working somewhere for 20 plus years and to never be remembered. I want to make an impact in this world. And so I want to be remembered by someone other than my children and my wife and my mom. So I did exactly what Shannon had said. She said, imagine Judah's life. And then out pops a novel in my head. That we're coming up upon the first anniversary since its publication.
Yeah.
So I got a chance to imagine what life would have been like for her. Now, what was interesting for me, I went to the plantation on October 15th, 2017. Just 2 days prior, on that Thursday, before going to the plantation, is when I defended my dissertation.
Oh, wow.
So it hit me that here I am at the pinnacle of my own academic experience. And Judah would not have been allowed even to learn to read or write. So it struck me that just 2 days prior to my meeting her, that I got my PhD. So
that's crazy. Yeah, what a juxtaposition.
Now this presentation that we were listening to, we were actually sitting in Judah's kitchen. And so there was a woman there that was in period attire who was cooking food on the fireplace, much like Judah would have had to. And she was making our dinner. A powerful, gut-wrenching, heart-rendering experience. And so I'm proud to have told her story. I think it's a pretty good book too, if I'm being honest.
I mean, I'm sure you don't put things out that are mediocre last time I checked. Yeah, that's powerful. Because here's the thing, you've written a number of books. Was this your third or fourth? Is that Send Judah First?
It was my second novel.
Second novel.
It was my eighth book altogether.
How was the writing process for you? There's so many people who often watch the show, listen to the show, that are thinking about writing books. How is the writing process different for you, writing nonfiction versus fiction?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really have a process.
Okay.
I just kind of open myself up to the story, and whatever happens, happens. With Judah, I was afraid to tell her story because, as I shared with you, Roots had made such an impact in my own understanding of the world, in my own understanding of the slavery experience.
Yeah.
And I read slave narratives for my fun reading, which is weird to say.
Yeah.
And so my favorite book of all time is a book called Wench by Dolan Valdez Perkins. Story of four enslaved women who were the mistresses, concubines, girlfriends of their masters. And the white men would take them to this resort in Ohio for a lover's weekend. And the book is so fascinating. And when I set out to write Judah's story, I had to sort of sit down with myself and say, well, I can't compete, and I don't want to compete with Alex Haley nor Dolan Perkins Valdez. I can't do it. I don't have it within. But I want to tell a real story. I want to tell an authentic, truthful story. And how can I do that in a way that's different?
Yeah.
And so I remember sitting on the stairs of the plantation kitchen and whispering to the world, to the universe, and I said, Judah, I will tell your story someday. And so I sort of opened myself up to the spirits, if you will, and asked Judah to talk to me as I was telling her story. And I think she listened.
Yeah.
And there were pieces of me. There were times when I was telling this story and I was writing this story that I felt it was Judah talking to me, willing me to tell her story.
Yeah.
And there were times when I was writing or I was attempting to write the story where I had to tell Judah to shut up because I believe she was actively telling me and downloading into me what to say.
Wow.
And I remember this one night, I was tossing and turning in bed because Judah was telling me different parts of the story that she wanted in there. And I yelled out because I said, Judah, I want to go to sleep. Shut up and let me get some sleep. And that was it. So I'll never forget this. We decided to, the publisher and I, we launched Send Judah First, the book, the final book. We launched it from the plantation. And
really?
Yep. And the plantation staff have been since the very beginning. Absolutely amazing. The executive director of Belle Grove Plantation, her name is Kristen Lays, and she was my ace number one in the hole the entire time. And I remember when I told that Saturday when we were listening to the presentation, and I said, I'm going to tell your story someday. Mm-hmm. I went and told Kristen and Shannon that I was going to write the novel. And Kristen said, Brian, we have a shelf in the bookstore, in our plantation books gift shop, where we'll reserve that for her, for Judah. Mm-hmm. And to see Judah on that shelf, even today, is an amazing thing. So we launched from Belle Grove August 3rd of 2019. So on the 2nd, I went down to the plantation where we were going to be doing the event on Saturday. So I went down with my family on Friday. And I remember turning onto the lane where Belle Grove sits. And I was driving down the lane and I whispered again to the universe and I said, Judah, I kept my promise. I'm home. I've written the story. I've told your story. I've done what I promised I would do. Thinking that would be enough for her. And thinking that she would let me live my life.
Yeah.
It's not true. So I introduced, the very next day we had a huge event. There were like 250 people there. And we got a chance to honor her and introduce her to the world. And I thought that would be the last time I would hear her speak. It was not. She still speaks to me now because she wants me to continue telling her story. She has said to me, find my babies. She wants me to find her 12 children and or their descendants. Yeah. And tell that story. I'm willing to do it, but we have not been able to find any of her descendants. We're still looking, and if any of you that are listening are related to Judah the enslaved cook of Belle Grove, Virginia, Belle Grove Plantation in Middletown, Virginia, please let me know after the show so we can hook up. So she did. She had, as I said, she had 12 children while she was enslaved. So surely we can find one of them, or somebody that belonged to her. And so the plantation has agreed with me that if we find somebody, we're going to continue telling that story.
Wow. Especially with things like 23andMe and those kind of things, like we should be able to, I feel like we're creating a whole like worldwide, genetic code essentially, or genetic tracing. Yeah. Right. So, yeah, definitely. It sounds like Judah's speaking through your dog right now. No, I'm just kidding, man. I'm just kidding. I don't want to belittle that. That's really beautiful, man. And thank you for sharing that story with us. I think that's incredible that she has been speaking through you. That is, I don't know if that's ever happened to me. I don't know if I've ever had somebody be like, no, you got to do this, like inside or whatnot. That's a pretty spiritual moment, that it sounds like you had. That's incredible. And I love how the how the plantation at Belgrave was super excited and supportive of all your work too. That's beautiful.
And they're different than other plantations that I've read about, because Belgrove is not hiding itself from its history. They are not changing their name. It is a plant. It was a working farm. It's still today a working farm. They're not hiding from their negative story. They're embracing it and telling the truth of their story. So they a number of places like down the south, they're not calling themselves plantations anymore, because they're vacation spots. And so Belgrove is embracing its history. For the last 3 years, they have been doing an archaeological dig on the site of the slave grounds, their former slave quarters. And when I tell you, they were absolutely amazing to me. So whatever they would find underground, they would send to me.
Yeah.
They would tell me, this is what we think it is, and this is how it played impacts here at Belgrove. And so they were absolutely phenomenal. And so I'm grateful to them, because they're still telling the truth of who they are. And what's really interesting is Belgrove has an interesting piece of history, because you may know President James Madison. You've heard that name before?
Sure, yeah. Wrote the Bill of Rights.
Yep. President Madison, Bill of Rights, he's one of the founding fathers of this country. He's the one who created the
Rick, we lost him again. Yo, Brian. Brian, you there? Hang on, man. We're gonna come right back to that James Madison. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so you were saying James Madison wrote the Bill of Rights, but also, and yeah, please continue.
His sister Nellie is the first mistress of Belgrove. So as a matter of fact, there's a little cameo for people who are looking for this book. There's a little cameo where President Madison shows up in the story, because in real life he spent his honeymoon at Belgrove. So it's a little piece of history, of real life history at the plantation.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that with us, man. I love it. I want to shift gears a little bit if we can. Brian, you down for that?
Absolutely.
Awesome,
Shift away.
Man. I love it. So we're going to shift gears here really quick. We're going to go into one of my favorite segments of the show. Fun fact, there's only 2 segments in the show. So here's a random video that I like to play before it. Here we go. Oh, not these two again over here. Okay, all right, break it up, you two. Enough of this here now. Oh, yeah, that's right. You're not smiling now, are you? Okay, this got silly in a hurry. I don't know who did the voiceover. Sounds like they got a great British accent, though. But Brian, that random video cues our segment that's called Something You Didn't Know. I can't even remember the title of my own segment. Things you didn't know about me that you didn't know before, but now you're glad you did. It's something like that. It's a long title. I'm probably not doing myself any favors there. But Brian, here's where I want to approach it with you. Is that, one thing that you and I have had conversations about is fear. And you touched on this very quickly before. But I think the topic of fear is fascinating. So I'll share one of my fears first, and then I would love to hear one of your fears. So one of my fears is that I am wasting my time. That I am completely wasting my time, and I don't know that I will get to the end of this road called life and turn around and be like, what was I actually doing? Like, did I actually do anything of substance? Did I actually create change? Did I move any needles? Did I fill any buckets? Did I insert your favorite euphemism there? But still, for me, that's a huge fear of mine, and it causes me to unfortunately be a workaholic. especially here in quarantine. It's interesting because I can't travel around and do the speeches that I normally do. Instead, it's just like me, my computer, occasionally my wife, but just me doing a whole bunch of work because it's like, this is the time. I can't waste the time. You're wasting time. And one of my favorite movies of all time, I know you're a bit of a cinephile, is A Bronx Tale. And the main catchphrase in A Bronx Tale is the worst. One of the main catchphrases in there is the worst thing in life is wasted talent. And I agree with that. I love that phrase. But for me, I would addend that a little bit to the worst thing in life is wasted time. And it causes me to be hyper selfish about my schedule, which I'm also self-conscious about. And so it's so funny the way that fear plays into so many aspects of my life.
Yeah, I get that. I get that hard. Matter of fact, my wife and I just had a conversation last night about doing things differently. Because I have been, for the better part of the last year, underemployed. And so I've been having these moments where I've been complaining that I can't find a job.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, you're not looking. I said, every day I'm looking for a job. She said, you got to do something different. So we just literally had this conversation in bed last night that there's something else that you're meant to do. So yeah, I totally get that. I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing, trying to insert my own sense of the world. Where am I supposed to be? Where am I making the most impact? So yeah, that's a struggle for me as well.
Yeah, for sure. Our buddy Scott Hendricks over here said A Bronx Tale, a good movie, but possibly better musical. I don't know if I agree with you, brother. But it was an exceptional musical. It was also a one-man play that starring Chaz Palminteri on Broadway for a little while as well. But I'm here for anything A Bronx Tale, the door test for life. So, Brian, I'd be curious to hear, what is one of your biggest fears? What's that one that you alluded to a little bit earlier?
I think it's what I was saying earlier is that I don't want it to be forgotten. I don't want my life to not speak for itself. I remember, I think it was in 2006 when Coretta Scott King died, and I remember watching it. They had televised her funeral, and I remember watching that funeral, and I was like, man. And I remember when Maya Angelou had walked onto the stage, and she spoke. She was on a cane, on a walker, and she had to have a stool to sit down. She wasn't able to stand.
Yeah.
And I said, man, all of our civil rights heroes are dying and you're leaving. And they're looking at us to say our work is not yet done. We're older. We're not able to do what we used to do. So I want to know that I have made some level of impact on our society today. So I can't do everything for everybody, but if I can, Martin Luther King's favorite song was, if I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody that they're traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. So I really take that to heart. If I can just do my part.
Yeah. That feeling of being insignificant is a fear that drives you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So here's my thing, because I agree with you on that. I also share that I'm doing all these things and it's not actually going to matter, right? Like in the long run, and that feeling of like, I'll be forgotten. I've said on the show before how I had a reoccurring dream when I was younger, mainly in high school, of me showing up to my own funeral, and there being no one there, right? Like no one would come. I had a recurring dream of being at my funeral, and no one was there except my parents were there. My brothers popped their heads in, but that was it. That I didn't make a difference in anybody else's life, and no one showed up. And that was a reoccurring dream that I had a lot in my childhood, and so it's definitely something that is a fuel to my fire. But I'm curious for you, how do you define significance?
That's a great question. I think when you think of what comes to mind for Brian Johnson, how has Brian Johnson made an impact on your life? That's what when the people say my name, oh Brian, and it brings a smile to their face. That for me shows that I have made some level of impact upon you.
Yeah.
I can't quantify it, but I put it this way: I like to bake.
Sure.
And so one of my favorite things is watching someone eat a dessert that I've made. And one of my best friends who passed away about 3 years ago, he when he came over, I always made his favorite dessert. And one of my favorite things in the entire world is when he would, and he closed his eyes and he would just kind of melt. Like he called me B. B, this is so good. And it bring the biggest smile to his face. Yeah. That was it for me. And so if I make something and I watch somebody eat it and it looks like they're enjoying it, that makes a difference for me. That's one of the reasons why I focused on cooking when I told you the story.
Yeah,
Judah was a cook, so there's a great deal in the book about the food that she would have made. Matter of fact, at the end of the book, we include 35 recipes that Judah would have likely made. Because for me, food is so important.
Yeah. And food is stapled to our memories, right? We know, obviously the sense of smell is the longest lasting memory that we have. And
right.
If we can't smell, we can't taste. And so that's a profound way to make an impact. That my grandmother, my grandmother, both grandmothers of mine, may they rest in peace. My dad's mother, though, she made world famous. My world famous is really just in the family, but world famous pasta fagioli. It's a great sauce with cannelloni beans and noodles. It's just Italian soup. It's delicious, and her pasta fagioli was legendary. And she told us, I mean, maybe a couple of years before she passed, she's like, the only thing you're going to remember about me is my pasta fagioli. And in the back of my head, I was like, A, it's always better to remember for something than nothing, but like that's not a bad memory. Because every time, especially when I think about how many times I go to Italian restaurants, like pasta fagioli is on every single menu, and so I'm thinking about her. I wanna learn how to make, and my dad just tried his mom's recipe for the first time ever, and so I mean that's not it's not a bad memory for us to have of a human at all.
Right, and that was similar for me. I collect cookbooks.
Okay.
And so one of my cookbooks in my collection is it's called White Trash Cooking.
I'm already invested.
And so my mom had come over to my house to visit, and she like me, loves food, and she was paging through this cookbook from White Trash Cooking. She shared with me the recipe that her mom used to make for her. She said she never knew there was a recipe for it. It was called the dish was called Slumgolini.
Great name.
Which means nothing. But Slumgolini is a dish where it's kind of a leftovers casserole. You take a little bit of this, whatever you have, and a little bit of that, a little bit of this, and you put it all in, cover it with sauce and cheese, put in the oven, and what comes out is amazing. And so she's reading this recipe in White Trash Cooking, tears boo-hooing down her face. And when she shared with me this memory that her mom made this dish, I had never felt so close to my mom, nor had I, because my grandma died. Her mother had died when I was 4, so I never really got a chance to know her. But I never felt more close to her than in that moment. And so imagine White Trash Cooking, Slumgullion, where you find this family story, this family connection. That's one of the great things about tracing genealogy. It's not just about names and dates. It's about where you come from. What is your family story? There's so much you can learn by uncovering who you belong to and how your family got to where they're at.
Not just branches on the tree. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And this is interesting is like when you think about this idea of family history, when you come back to this idea of significance, there've been so many movies that have been written around that concept of people wanting to find significance, right? I think
Right.
even most recently, obviously Hamilton, you know, we talked about that in the top three, but Hamilton coming out and this concept of who lives, who dies, who tells your story, you'll never be satisfied. Like these kind of big
Yep.
themes that run through pervasive through Hamilton.
Don't want to miss my shot.
Come on, exactly right. And then also, like when you think about animated movies like Coco, Coco is all about how are we, how are we remembering people? Like, as soon as someone
Yep.
stops saying your name, then that's when you're remembered. As long as people are still saying your name or something that you did, and when that happens, then your soul, when that stops happening, that's when your soul finally dies or whatnot. But other top, even like Iron Man, we could say is all around significance, right? Like, there's so many places where that is a constant theme for sure. Do you have any movies that stick out to you that kind of punch you in the gut that way? Like Hamilton really, for that theme of its of the show, really kind of gets me right in the heart. But I'm curious, do you have any movies that you watch that punch you in that way?
Absolutely. It's funny because being a cinephile, that people ask me, can I just watch a movie without critiquing, without sort of reacting to it? I was like, absolutely not. All movies to me are trying to say something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that you say about the understanding of your name, because one of those movies for me, the very first time I ever watched the movie The Breakfast Club, that movie stands out to me.
I gotta hear this story.
Super important.
Yeah, tell me more.
It's the very first movie where I ever saw myself and in the characters. And so when I was in high school, I was a big nerd. And so the character, the nerd, the brain, from that story, from that movie, really stuck out to me. As a matter of fact, I said at the end of that movie that I think John Hughes owes me money, because that story of that nerd was so powerful to me. It was like it's like John Hughes had followed me in high school. And so I'm watches the credits of the movie. And watching the credits, and Anthony Michael Hall is the actor who played the nerd, the brain character. And very few people know that the brain, his name was Brian. And so what's my name? It's Brian. So identifying with this character, this nerd character. But so I'm reading the credits and I notice his name is Brian Johnson. So who am I? Brian Johnson. So that movie just spoke to me as so super important, and really speaking of what it meant to be a child of the 80s. James, did I lose you?
I love that. No, yeah, I'm right here, brother. I'm right here. I love that. Sorry, I was giving you the spotlight for a little bit. I'm always these little fun things that I can play around with here. I always wanted to try some things. So thanks for being my guinea pig. First off, I love that. The fact that you picked The Breakfast Club is so delightfully random to me. But you never know what movie's going to hit you when, right? Free Willy was my favorite movie for a long time back when I wanted to be a marine biologist, and you never know what movie's going to hit you when. And
I would say the other movie that for me that does that is it's called Julie and Julia.
Julie and Julia, okay. It's about the Julia Childs, and
because now because of what I do with film, I rarely ever go to the movies on opening night.
Okay.
Because I like to experience movies. I want to go in and I want to have a place to myself where I can kind of stretch out, put my feet up.
Yeah.
And so I remember going first thing in the morning. So I was the only one in the theater. It's like 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm the only one in the theater watching this movie. And so the movie hit me so hard, I'm crying, like boo-hooing in this movie. Because the theme of the story was about this young woman who was trying to find her place in the world. And she found it by connecting with Julia Child and cooking her way through the joy of cooking. And that movie spoke volumes to me about living your dream. And I think it's the probably the most important film of the last 10 years. So good.
Okay. That was a bold statement. You think that, let me just make sure I hear you correct, that Julia and Julia is one of the most important film in the last 10 years?
For understanding one of.
Yeah.
So for understanding what is your place in the world, yes. I could argue that Black Panther is the best movie of the last 10 years.
I would hang out with you in that. I would hang out with you in that argument and be on your side. That's an incredibly powerful movie.
Ridiculously good.
Yes, and phenomenally done as well, for sure. Yeah, I love that. Brian, I am so grateful that you came to hang out with me on this show today. I'm curious if people on the that are listening, I don't know if anybody has any questions for either Brian or I. Again, Brian, a giant cinephile. If you want to know some of his favorite movies of all time in various genres, he'd happily tell you those. So feel free. Or if there's a movie that you love that you want to see if he's watched, throw it in the comments, and let's see if he's got any thoughts. So while you all are doing that, to those of you that are listening to the podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much to Brian Johnson for hanging out with me. I hope that you'll check us out next week on Diner Talks with James. And in the meantime, make sure that you check out Brian at briancjohnson.net. Make sure you check out his book, Send Judah First. Also great references. And if you want to hear the Q&A that Brian and I are going to do, make sure you check out my YouTube channel. But for those of you on the podcast, thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment. I'd love to know who you are and why you love this. Y'all take care and have a good night.
Thanks a lot.
Brian, I appreciate you, brother. How are you feeling about this? You enjoying yourself? Absolutely.
Anytime I get the chance to hang out with you, it's all good.
Hey, so here's a question for you, Brian. While some other people are maybe thinking of some questions, if I were going to come over and you said, all right, this is the first time James is coming over. I'm bringing Tina. First time James is coming home, and he's bringing Tina with him. We're gonna have a nice meal with him, but I'm gonna shut it down for dessert. I'm a flex on dessert. What's your move? Like what's your power move?
Well, for dessert, it's at my apple sweet potato pie. It's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
It's dangerous.
I've never had that.
Nobody has. It's something I create. And so you've had sweet potato pie?
Absolutely.
So imagine now, and under the custard is a layer of apple pie.
Wow.
It's so good. It's ridiculous.
That sounds like serve it warm too, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Little whipped cream on it.
Yeah, I'm here for that. Yep. Let's go. All right. I'm booking a flight. No. Brian, we got a question here from Scott that I think is pretty cool. Any advice you would give to those who may be interested in adopting children?
Yes. It can be very expensive. But I say that with a caveat. That's the browner the child, the cheaper it is. So white kids are more expensive. So this is where you see that systemic racism playing out.
Absolutely, yeah.
So white children are more expensive. Brown children are less expensive. And in addition to that, like if you're willing to adopt special needs kids, they're like giving them away when they can.
Wow.
So the browner and the more needy in terms of their own physical development, the more likelihood that you can get them a lot cheaper. So I would not encourage people to do what I did. I'm not saying teenage adoption is for everyone. I would say that it is a process that you need to go into with your eyes open, and that you have a supportive network in terms of a partner who's fully engaged with you. Because, as I said before, people want to have input into their children's lives. But with teens, the later you get them, the less time you have to really develop them. So like with my son, who was 15 when we got him, he was 21 when he finally graduated high school. And so that's not a lot of time, 15 to 21. And then, so he was really a full-grown adult by the time he left home. And so there's not a lot of time for us to pour into him all the things that we think he needed. So go into it with your eyes open. For our case, the thing that we had to find out the hard way, because, as I said, our adoptions were sort of known adoptions. We knew their families and they knew us. So our daughter, well, and our son as well. They were very much connected to their parents. So for us, again, I had to continuously recognize that when they would get phone calls from their parents, that they were connected by blood to those parents. And so there were some jealousy moments on my part where they're like, "Hey, wait a minute, we're the ones taking care of you. Why are you paying such attention to those people? Those people gave you up."
Yeah.
But my wife helped me to understand that I would never replace their parents in their minds. And so once I got over that, as it was, it got better for us. There's a great movie on adoption. What's that movie? The Man of the House? No, what is it? It's about Mark Wahlberg. It's a recent movie about adoption. What's that movie?
It'll come back to you.
And where the older daughter, she was a teenager, trying to understand, trying to help her adoptive parents understand her. She's like, "I don't know you. I don't know this. I don't know who." Instant Family is what it's called.
Instant Family. Okay.
Instant Family. Great movie about adoption. But she was like, "I don't know y'all. And so you tell me you love me, but you can say it and it'll just be words." So I wanted them to understand that I would bleed for them.
Yeah.
They are a part of my soul. My wife and I keep a plaque, painting, whatever on the wall. It's got a poster where it says, "Family is, or home is where each lives for the other and all live for God." So that's, for me, is super important, that the development of a home that included my own children, biological children, and these two kids who were born to other people. But they were a part of me as if they came from underneath my wife's ribcage, even though they did. So go into it with your eyes open, but it is a process.
Yeah. It's interesting. My dad, you haven't met my father, but he's a long time watcher. He's going to be on the show at some point. He just doesn't know that. But my dad asked, "Brian, thanks so much for sharing your life with us. I'm curious how you felt when you had to have the quote unquote talk with your natural children, but not your adopted children, or maybe you did have with your adopted children. I'm not sure."
No, I did not have that talk with my adopted kids. Part of that is because they were already gone on their own.
Sure.
When all this craziness started. But I think if I had to have the talk today with my older kids, it would be understanding that their white skin in one way or another protects them in different ways than it does me or does their mother. Having that talk with my biological children was much harder, in the sense that helping him to see, my son particularly. I remember when Trayvon Martin was killed, and I made a Facebook post. I was in a class learning how to do Photoshop, and I took a picture of my son, and I swirled his face. He was wearing a hoodie, and I swirled his face with Photoshop, and I put it on Facebook, and I put the caption, "This is what George Zimmerman saw," because he did not see Trayvon's face. He saw the threats. This is an aberration.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started sharing with my son that the world does not necessarily see him. The world sees whatever they want to see. They see the mediated image of what it means to be a black man.
Yeah.
And said, the dream that I have for you in the future is that you are alive, that you are free to be who you are, whatever that means for you. But that's interesting, John. I never really thought about having to talk with my white kids. But yeah, I wanted my kids to recognize, because I live in as you mentioned, I live in the country. I'm in the middle of nowhere, and there's not a lot of us around where I live, and so it's unfortunate that the mediated image of the black man is so negative.
Yeah.
That my son, when he was in school, was an honor student, 4 points, whatever, speaks 2 languages. He's a straight A student. But unfortunately, so many people only see him as a black man, and whatever that conjures for them. But I want him to be free to be his nerdy self. And one thing that my white son Thomas, something he said to me. This is where he and I really had to come to terms. He used to say all the time that he was blacker than me, because he had bought into the idea that to be black man, to be hip hop and slang and all that.
Yeah.
And he used to walk with that pimp, that little dip,
the limp. Yep.
And so he used to say that he was blacker than me. I said, and that's really where I helped him understand, to see his white privilege is different than my black privilege, if that is such a thing.
Yeah.
So if there's any talk that I had with him, it was that.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Brian, powerful. Thank you so much for those 2 great questions. And thanks so much for your candid answers too, Brian. I appreciate it. I know anytime we talk, I always leave with more thoughts and sometimes more questions, but that's good, because that just keeps me coming back for more. I cannot thank you enough for spending time with us today, Brian. You are incredible. I really appreciate it. And y'all clap it out one more time for Dr. Brian C. Johnson. I appreciate you, brother. Thank you again for coming through.
Thanks, babe. Love you.
Indeed. My friends, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Diner Talks. I hope that you will come and hang out with us again next week. Next week, we're going to have Stacey Nato on the show. Stacey Nato Kirsten. She got married. I should probably say her whole name now. But she's going to be an incredible guest. I hope you'll tune in. As you know, we're here every single Wednesday, 9:00 p.m. Eastern. And whatever other time zone you're in, you know the way your time zone works. But thank you so much for coming here, y'all, and kicking it with me, kicking it with Brian. What a special guest. What a special show. We look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, keep asking powerful questions, because small talk sucks otherwise. Thanks, friends. Y'all take care. Be well.